My son humiliated me with 15 slaps across my face, right there in front of everyone. Each strike burned hotter than the last, but what hurt most was seeing the satisfied smirk on his face afterward. He wanted to show everyone who was in control, who had the power in that house. For years, I had sacrificed everything to build what we had, working endless hours while he grew up surrounded by comfort and privilege. But that night, something inside me shattered completely. As I stood there with my cheeks stinging and my dignity in ruins, I made a decision that would change everything. He thought those slaps would break me, would force me to submit to his demands and sign over everything I had worked for. He was so confident, so certain that I had nowhere to go and no way to fight back. My own flesh and blood, the child I had raised and loved unconditionally, had become my worst enemy. But what he didn't know, what none of them suspected, was that I had been preparing for this moment. Those papers he wanted me to sign so desperately, I did sign them that very night. But not the ones he expected. Subscribe to find out what happened when my son discovered the truth. I never imagined my own son would raise his hand to me. Not once, and certainly not 15 times in front of his wife, her family, and the business partners he was trying so desperately to impress. But that's exactly what happened on a Tuesday evening that started like any other and ended with my entire world turned upside down. Let me take you back to the beginning, to help you understand how a mother's unconditional love can be twisted into something unrecognizable, and how the child you sacrifice everything for can become the person who hurts you most. I raised my son alone after my husband died, when the boy was only 7 years old. Those were brutal years, working 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I cleaned offices at night, worked as a seamstress during the day, and took in laundry on weekends. My hands were always raw, my back constantly aching, but I never complained because every sacrifice was for him, for his future, for the opportunities I never had. By the time he turned 18, I had managed to save enough to start a small textile business. It was nothing fancy at first, just a tiny workshop with 2 old sewing machines and a dream. But I had a talent for design and an unmatched work ethic. Within 5 years, that small workshop had grown into a successful factory employing 50 people. Within 10 years, we had contracts with major retail chains across 3 states. Throughout all of this, I made sure my son received the best education money could buy. Private schools, university abroad, business courses, language classes. I wanted him to have every advantage, every tool he would need to succeed in life. And I was so proud when he graduated with honors and returned home ready to join the family business. "Mom, I'm ready to help you take this company to the next level," he told me that day, his diploma still fresh in his hand. My heart swelled with pride and hope. Finally, all those years of sacrifice were paying off. Finally, I would have a partner, someone to share the burden and the dreams. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Give it a thumbs up and comment what you would do in this situation. For the first 2 years, everything seemed perfect. He brought fresh ideas and modern strategies. We expanded into new markets, updated our equipment, hired more staff. The business grew even faster with both of us working together. I started to dream about retirement, about finally resting after decades of exhaustion. I imagined traveling, taking up hobbies, maybe even finding love again. But then he met her, Miranda. She came from a wealthy family, the kind of people who had never worked a day in their lives for anything. Old money, inherited properties, social connections. She was beautiful, I'll admit that, but there was something cold in her eyes from the very first time my son brought her home for dinner. "So you started this business from nothing?" she asked me that evening, her tone dripping with barely concealed disdain. How quaint! My family has owned their enterprises for 4 generations. I felt my face burning with shame, but I smiled politely. I wanted my son to be happy, and if this was the woman he loved, I would accept her. How naive I was. The wedding was extravagant, paid for mostly by her family, which gave them endless opportunities to remind me of my humble origins. I sat at the ceremony watching my son exchange vows, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing him to something darker than just marriage. A lump tightened in my throat as he kissed his bride, and Miranda's parents looked at me with thinly veiled contempt. After the wedding, changes began immediately. My son started arriving at the factory with new demands, new ideas that all seemed to come from Miranda and her family. Mom, we need to modernize our image. This place looks too ... Working class? We need to attract high-end clients. We need to restructure management. You've been doing things the old way for too long. We should bring in some of Miranda's business consultants. They have experience with companies at our level. Would you do the same in my place? Each suggestion felt like a small betrayal, a rejection of everything I had built with my own bleeding hands. But I tried to be understanding. He was young, ambitious, influenced by his new wife and her wealthy family. I told myself it was natural that he would find balance eventually. But the suggestions became demands. The demands became ultimatums. And slowly, I found myself being pushed out of my own company. Meetings were scheduled without informing me. Decisions were made without my input. My office was moved to a smaller room in the back. New managers were hired to assist me, but they were really there to monitor and limit my authority. "You're getting older, Mom," my son said one day, his voice patronizing in a way that made my blood boil with indignation. "You should be thinking about slowing down, enjoying life. Let me and Miranda handle the day-to-day operations." I felt my heart pounding so hard it hurt. This was my company, my life's work, my legacy. But when I looked at my son's face, I saw a stranger staring back at me. Where was the little boy who used to hug my legs and tell me I was the best mother in the world? Where was the young man who had thanked me tearfully at his graduation for all my sacrifices? "I'm not ready to step back," I said firmly. "This company is still very much mine, and I intend to remain actively involved." His jaw tightened. Miranda, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward with a cold smile. "That's the problem right there," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "You can't let go. You can't accept that your son has grown beyond your limited vision. You're holding this company back with your outdated methods and your stubbornness." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I held them back. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing." The situation deteriorated rapidly after that confrontation. My son and Miranda began openly discussing transition plans and retirement packages in front of me, as if I were already gone. They brought in lawyers and accountants, all chosen by Miranda's family. They started referring to the company as ours instead of acknowledging it as mine. The employees who had been with me from the beginning were systematically replaced with Miranda's connections. People I had trained, mentored, and supported through personal crises were dismissed with cold efficiency. Each departure felt like another piece of my heart being torn away. "You're being too sentimental," my son said when I protested. "This is business, Mom. You taught me that yourself. We can't let emotions cloud our judgment." The irony of those words was almost unbearable. I had taught him about business, yes, but I had also tried to teach him about loyalty, gratitude, and compassion. Clearly, those lessons hadn't taken root. Things came to a head 6 months after the wedding. Miranda announced she was pregnant, and suddenly the pressure for me to step aside became overwhelming. They wanted full control of the company before the baby arrived. They wanted me to sign over my shares, my ownership, my entire legacy, in exchange for a modest monthly payment and a vague promise of being taken care of. "Think about your grandchild," Miranda cooed, one hand resting on her still flat belly. "Don't you want to spend time with the baby instead of wasting your final years in a factory? Don't you want your grandchild to inherit a modern, successful company, not some outdated relic?" My hands trembled with contained rage. How dare she talk about my final years as if I were ancient and decrepit? I was 62 years old, healthy, sharp, and more than capable of running my own company. But they had already decided I was obsolete, irrelevant, in the way. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? I refused to sign. I refused to surrender what I had built with my blood, sweat, and tears. And that's when my son's mask finally slipped completely. He started coming home late, drinking heavily, and speaking to me with open hostility. The grandson or granddaughter I had dreamed of welcoming became a weapon they wielded against me. Miranda would place her hand on her belly and sigh dramatically whenever I was around. "It's so stressful for the baby, all this conflict," she would say. "The doctor says stress in the first trimester is terrible for fetal development. But I guess some people care more about money and control than about their own grandchild's health." The manipulation was so blatant it would have been laughable if it weren't breaking my heart. But my son stood beside her, nodding in agreement, fully supporting every poisonous word that came out of her mouth. They organized a dinner at their house, ostensibly to talk things through calmly. I arrived hoping for reconciliation, for a glimpse of the son I remembered. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Miranda's parents were there, her brother, a lawyer, several business associates, and there, on the dining room table, was a stack of papers, transferred documents, resignation letters, release forms, everything needed to strip me of ownership and control. "We thought it would be easier to do this all at once," my son said, not quite meeting my eyes. "With witnesses present, everything legal and official." I felt the floor opening beneath my feet. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a corporate takeover disguised as a gathering. They had planned this, choreographed it, brought in an audience to pressure me into compliance. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not tonight, not ever. This is my company, and you have no right to take it from me." Miranda's father, a portly man with cruel eyes, leaned forward. "Don't be ridiculous. You're an old woman who got lucky in business. Your son has actual education, actual credentials. He's the future of this company. You're just an obstacle. Comment below what you would have done differently." The room fell silent. Even my son looked uncomfortable at the naked contempt in his father-in-law's voice, but he said nothing to defend me. He just stood there, letting this stranger insult and belittle his own mother. "I said no," I repeated, more forcefully this time. "I'm leaving now. This conversation is over." I turned to walk toward the door, dignity wrapped around me like armor, despite the tears threatening to spill down my cheeks. And that's when it happened. My son grabbed my arm and spun me around. His face was red with fury and something else, something desperate and ugly. "You're being selfish and unreasonable," he shouted. "After everything I've done for this company, after all my hard work, you still treat me like a child who can't be trusted. You've done for the company." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I built that company from nothing while you were still in diapers. I sacrificed everything so you could have opportunities I never had. And this is how you repay me." His grip on my arm tightened painfully. "You're living in the past, old woman. The world has moved on without you. Why can't you just accept that and step aside gracefully, old woman?" My own son had just called me an old woman, with the same contempt someone might use for a piece of trash. A cold fury settled over me. "Let go of my arm," I said quietly, dangerously. Instead, he raised his other hand, and he slapped me, hard, across my face. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent room. I was so shocked I couldn't even react. My cheek burned, my ear rang, but more than the physical pain was the emotional devastation. My son, my baby boy, had just struck me. Before I could process what had happened, he hit me again, and again. Each slap harder than the last, each one accompanied by a litany of accusations and resentments I never knew he harbored. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. This is for all the times you made me feel guilty for wanting more than your small-minded ambitions. Slap. This is for embarrassing me in front of Miranda's family with your working-class mentality. Slap. This is for refusing to let me be the man I'm meant to be. Slap. He hit me 15 times. 15. I counted each one through the haze of pain and disbelief. By the end, I had stopped trying to block the blows. I just stood there and took it, watching my son's face contort with rage and something that looked almost like satisfaction. Miranda watched with her arms crossed, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Her family looked on with approval, as if I were a disobedient servant finally being put in my place. The business associates shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing, did nothing to intervene. When my son finally stopped, breathing heavily, his hand red from the force of his strikes, the room was absolutely silent. My face felt like it was on fire. I could taste blood in my mouth. Tears finally spilled down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of grief for the death of something precious. The death of the relationship I had cherished above all else. "Now will you sign?" my son asked, his voice hoarse. "Or do we need to continue this lesson in reality?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing of the child I had raised. This was a stranger, molded by greed and influenced by people who measured worth in dollar signs and social status. My blood boiled with indignation at what he had become, at what I had somehow failed to prevent. But I also felt something else. A clarity, cold and sharp as ice. A decision crystallizing in the aftermath of violence. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'll sign." The relief on my son's face was immediate and repulsive. Miranda clapped her hands together delightedly. Her father nodded with satisfaction, as if a difficult but necessary task had been completed. "Do you think I overreacted?" "I'll sign tonight," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "but not here. I need to have my own lawyer review the documents. I'll have everything finalized and delivered to you by tomorrow morning." My son frowned, suspicion flickering across his features. "Why can't you sign now?" "Everything's ready." "Because I want my own legal representation to confirm everything is in order," I said firmly. "You've made it very clear, this is a business transaction, not a family matter. So I'll treat it as such, professionally, with lawyers and witnesses of my own choosing." I could see him weighing whether to push back, whether to force the issue. But Miranda put a hand on his arm and whispered something in his ear. She was smiling, confident that she had won. Why wouldn't she be? They had beaten me into submission, literally, and I had agreed to sign. "Fine," my son said finally. "But tomorrow morning, first thing. No delays, no games." "No games," I agreed. Then I walked out of that house with my head held as high as I could manage, despite the throbbing pain in my face and the pieces of my heart scattered behind me. The drive home was a blur. I kept seeing my son's face twisted with rage, kept feeling the impact of his hand against my cheek. How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong? Was Miranda entirely to blame? Or had I been blind to something in my son's character that had always been there, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? When I finally reached my house, I sat in my car for a long time, just breathing. Then I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to my lawyer, a sharp woman who had helped me navigate various business challenges over the years. The second was to my accountant. The third was to a private investigator I had hired 2 months earlier, when I first began to suspect that my son and Miranda were planning something drastic. Comment if you know someone like this. You see, I hadn't been completely naive. I had watched my son change over the months since his wedding. I had noticed the cold calculation replacing the warmth in his eyes. And I had taken certain precautions, certain steps, to protect myself and my life's work. The investigator had uncovered some interesting information. Turns out Miranda's family wasn't quite as wealthy as they pretended to be. Their businesses were failing, hemorrhaging money due to mismanagement and expensive lifestyles. They were drowning in debt, mortgaged to the hilt, desperately seeking an infusion of capital. My successful factory was exactly what they needed to stay afloat. My son had been lied to, manipulated, seduced by false promises of joining high society. Miranda had never loved him. She had identified a target, a weak point, a way into my company and my assets. And my son, flattered by the attention of a beautiful woman from a good family, had fallen for every lie. But I had more than just information about Miranda's family. I had documentation. I had recordings. I had evidence of fraud, of forged contracts, of money they had already been siphoning from the company through various schemes. I had proof of everything they had done and planned to do. And I had something else. Something I had never told my son because I wanted it to be a surprise for his future, a gift for when he was truly ready to take over the company. But circumstances had changed dramatically. That night, I didn't sleep. I spent hours with my lawyer and accountant, reviewing documents, making arrangements, setting everything in motion. By dawn, I had signed papers, just not the ones my son expected. Was I wrong to feel this way? At 8 in the morning, a courier arrived at my son's house with a large envelope. Inside were the documents he had demanded I sign, but they looked different than expected. Also included were several other envelopes, addressed to various parties. My phone rang at 8. My son, his voice shrill with panic. "What the hell did you do? What is this?" "I signed the papers," I said calmly, despite my racing heart. "Exactly as I promised. These aren't the right papers. These are transfer documents for the entire company, but they say you're transferring everything to a trust. And there are liens and legal holds, and I don't understand what's happening." "Let me explain," I said, my voice as cold as I had ever heard it. "Last night, you assaulted me. You struck me 15 times in front of witnesses. That alone is enough for criminal charges. But I'm not interested in sending you to prison. Despite everything, you're still my son, even if you've forgotten I'm your mother." "Mom, he started, but I cut him off. "I'm not finished. What you don't know is that for the past 15 years, the factory hasn't technically been owned solely by me. When your father died, he left a trust in your name, to be managed by me until you turned 35 or demonstrated the maturity to handle it responsibly. The factory was funded partially by that trust, making you a legal co-owner of sorts, though with no actual control until certain conditions were met." Silence on the other end of the line. I continued. "Those conditions included demonstrating respect, integrity, and business acumen. You've demonstrated none of those things. So, as the trust manager, I've exercised my legal right to dissolve the partnership and transfer all assets to a new trust that will donate profits to charitable organizations supporting single mothers and domestic violence survivors." "You can't do that," my son shouted. "That's my inheritance. That's my company." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment what you would do in this situation. "It was your inheritance," I corrected. Past tense. "You forfeited it when you raised your hand to me. The legal documents are ironclad. I've had lawyers reviewing the terms for months, ever since I started to worry about your judgment. Everything is completely legal and final. But what about the factory? What about the employees? You're just going to shut it down?" "I'm not shutting anything down," I said. "I've promoted my longtime floor manager to CEO. She's been with me from the beginning. She knows every aspect of the business, and she shares my values. The factory will continue operating, and the profits will go to helping other women escape situations like mine, women who are betrayed by the people they trusted most." I could hear Miranda screaming in the background, her cultured voice deteriorating into shrill hysteria as she realized her plan had completely collapsed. "And one more thing," I added. "Those other envelopes the courier delivered. One is addressed to the police, with a full report of last night's assault, including photographs of my injuries and statements from the one decent person in that room who was horrified by what happened and agreed to testify. Another is addressed to Miranda's parents' creditors, with detailed evidence of the fraud they've been committing and the money they've been stealing from the company over the past months. Their assets will be seized, their business licenses revoked, and they'll likely face criminal charges." "Mom, please," my son said, and for the first time in months, I heard something genuine in his voice. Fear, regret, possibly even remorse. "Please, don't do this. We can work this out. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. Please, give me another chance." A lump tightened in my throat. Part of me, The mother who had loved him unconditionally for his entire life wanted to relent, wanted to forgive, forget, pretend last night never happened. But I couldn't. The slaps had hurt, yes, but they had also freed me from an illusion. My son was not the person I had believed him to be. Maybe he could change, could grow, could learn from this catastrophe. But that growth would have to happen without access to my hard-earned legacy. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? I gave you every chance, I said quietly. I gave you love, education, opportunities, partnership, and patience. You responded with disrespect, betrayal, and violence. The legal consequences are already in motion. There's nothing more to discuss. What am I supposed to do? He asked, and he sounded lost, like a child. For a moment, I remembered the 7-year-old boy sobbing at his father's funeral, clinging to me as if I were his only anchor in a terrifying world. What you should have been doing all along, I said. Figure out who you are without your mother's money propping you up. Learn what real work means. Discover whether you have any integrity left underneath all the greed and entitlement Miranda and her family cultivated in you. And maybe, someday, when you've actually become a man instead of a spoiled child in a man's body, we can talk again. But that day is not today. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of betrayal and disappointment had been crushing me, but now it was gone, replaced by a strange sense of peace. The legal proceedings moved quickly. My son tried to fight the trust dissolution, but every lawyer he consulted told him the same thing. The documents were airtight, the terms were clear, and his actions had triggered legitimate forfeiture clauses. Miranda's family was arrested within a week. The evidence of their fraud was overwhelming, and they faced serious prison time. Miranda herself filed for divorce from my son within 2 weeks, revealing that she had never been pregnant at all. The whole thing had been another manipulation, another pressure tactic. My son was devastated, but I felt no sympathy. He had chosen her over me. He had enabled her cruelty and participated in her schemes. He had to live with those choices. The employees at the factory were thrilled when I announced the new structure. Many of them had been heartbroken when my son started firing longtime workers and replacing them with Miranda's inexperienced but well-connected friends. The rehiring process was joyful, seeing familiar faces return to the floor. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. My new CEO, Carmen, had started as a seamstress in my original tiny workshop 23 years earlier. She had worked her way up through every position, learning every skill, earning the respect of every worker. She wept when I told her about the promotion and the trust that would now control the company. "You're making sure this place actually means something," she said, gripping my hands. "Not just profits, but purpose. Helping other women who are struggling like we both struggled. This is beautiful. You'll do amazing work," I assured her. "I'll stay on as an advisor, but this is your show now. Build something that makes us both proud." In the weeks that followed, I did file criminal charges against my son for assault. He pleaded guilty, received a suspended sentence and mandatory counseling, and was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service at a women's shelter. I hoped that working with actual victims of domestic violence might open his eyes to the magnitude of what he had done. I also established a foundation in my late husband's name, funding programs for single mothers, starting businesses, and supporting survivors of family violence. Every quarter, the factory's profits would fund scholarships, microloans, counseling services, and legal assistance. My life's work would continue to make a difference long after I was gone. As for me, I started the therapy I should have begun years earlier. Working through the complex emotions of betrayal, grief, anger, and loss. Losing my son, not to death, but to his own choices, was a unique kind of agony. But I also felt liberated, free from the constant stress of trying to salvage an unsalvageable situation. 6 months after that terrible night, I received a letter from my son. He had been living in a tiny apartment, working as a warehouse stalker, struggling to make ends meet on minimum wage. Miranda had taken him for everything in the divorce, including his savings. Her family's legal troubles had destroyed his reputation by association. He had lost everything. Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing. The letter was long, rambling, filled with apologies and self-recrimination. He acknowledged his mistakes, accepted responsibility for his actions, and expressed remorse that seemed genuine. He didn't ask for money or for me to reverse my decisions. He just wanted me to know he was sorry, and he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again. I read that letter a dozen times, analyzing every word, looking for manipulation or false notes, but it sounded real. It sounded like my son had finally hit rock bottom and was beginning the long, painful process of rebuilding himself into someone better. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to think, to feel, to decide what, if anything, I owed him after everything that had happened. My therapist encouraged me to take as long as I needed to prioritize my own healing rather than rushing to forgive just because society expects mothers to be endlessly forgiving. After a month, I sent a brief reply. I acknowledged his letter, told him I appreciated his apology, and said that, perhaps someday, if he continued on this path of genuine growth and change, we might be able to rebuild some kind of relationship. But that day was far in the future, and any reconciliation would be entirely on my terms. Comment below what you would have done differently. He responded with a simple thank you. I understand. I'll keep working on becoming someone you can be proud of again. I don't know if we'll ever have a real relationship again. I don't know if I can truly forgive what he did, even if I understand the circumstances and influences that warped his judgment. But I do know that I made the right decision that night when I signed those papers. Some people might think I was too harsh, that I should have given my son another chance, that family should always come first. But those people never felt the sting of their child's hand across their face, never counted 15 blows while watching their life's work being stolen, never experienced the unique betrayal of being attacked by the person you sacrificed everything to raise and protect. I learned some hard truths through this experience. I learned that love, no matter how pure and unconditional, cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. I learned that sacrifice does not automatically earn gratitude or loyalty. I learned that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones most capable of devastating us. But I also learned that I am stronger than I ever imagined. I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even against your own child. I learned that dignity and self-respect are worth more than any relationship, even the sacred bond between mother and son. I learned that justice sometimes requires courage, and courage sometimes requires breaking your own heart. The factory is thriving under Carmen's leadership. We've expanded our charitable programs, hired even more workers, and become known not just for quality products but for ethical business practices and community investment. Every month, I receive letters from women whose lives have been changed by the Foundation's programs. Women who escaped abusive situations or started successful businesses thanks to our support. Do you think I overreacted? Those letters are my legacy now, more meaningful than any amount of money or any corporate empire. Knowing that my life's work is helping others, that my pain and sacrifice serve a purpose beyond profit, gives me a sense of peace I never had when I was focused solely on building wealth for my son's inheritance. I'm 63 now, officially retired from day-to-day operations, but still actively involved in the Foundation's strategic planning. I've started dating again, carefully and cautiously, testing whether I can trust someone new after such profound betrayal. I've reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the years of building the business. I've taken up painting, traveling, and gardening, all the things I postponed while working 3 jobs and then running a company. My face healed, though I still see the faint shadow of a bruise when I look in the mirror on difficult days. But the emotional wounds run deeper and take longer to heal. There are moments when I miss my son desperately, when I would give anything to have my little boy back, the one who thought I hung the moon and stars. But that little boy is gone, replaced by a man who has to find his own way now, without the cushion of his mother's unconditional support and resources. Miranda, I heard through mutual acquaintances, moved back in with her parents after they were released from prison with massive fines and permanent business restrictions. Their social standing is destroyed, their wealth gone, their reputation in ruins. She works as a receptionist somewhere, no longer able to maintain the illusion of superiority that she wielded so effectively against me. Was I wrong to feel this way? I feel no satisfaction in her downfall or her family's disgrace. Revenge, I've learned, is hollow. It doesn't undo the harm or heal the wounds. But justice, true justice that protects others and prevents future harm, that provides a sense of rightness that revenge never could. If I could go back to that night, knowing what I know now, would I do anything differently? Perhaps I would have left sooner, before the situation escalated to violence. Perhaps I would have confronted my son earlier about the changes I was seeing in his character. Perhaps I would have been more suspicious of Miranda from the beginning, instead of trying so hard to accept her for my son's sake. But I wouldn't change my decision to sign those papers, to dissolve his inheritance, to redirect my life's work toward helping others rather than enriching someone who had proven himself unworthy of that gift. That decision, made in the immediate aftermath of trauma, turned out to be the wisest choice I've ever made. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who is being disrespected, diminished, or abused by family members, I want you to know that you deserve better. Your sacrifices and love are precious, and they should never be weaponized against you. It's not selfish to protect yourself, even from your own children. It's not cruel to enforce consequences for cruel behavior. It's not wrong to prioritize your own dignity and safety. Comment if you know someone like this. Family is supposed to be a source of love, support, and mutual respect. When it becomes a source of pain, manipulation, and violence, you have not only the right, but the responsibility to protect yourself. No one, not even the child you birthed and raised, has the right to abuse you. I share my story not for pity or praise, but in the hope that it might help someone else recognize their own situation and find the courage to act. Abuse in families is often hidden, especially when the abuser is an adult child and the victim is an aging parent. Society tells us that parents, especially mothers, must endure anything from their children, must forgive any transgression, must sacrifice everything, including their own well-being. But that's wrong. That's a recipe for continued abuse and broken spirits. We must challenge that narrative and support parents, particularly elderly parents, who are being exploited, manipulated, or harmed by their adult children. The trust I established has helped 47 women so far start their own businesses. It has provided emergency housing for 63 survivors of domestic violence. It has funded legal representation for 32 women fighting custody battles against abusive ex-partners. Every single one of those victories is worth more to me than any relationship with a son who valued money and status over love and respect. If my son truly changes, if he genuinely becomes the man I once hoped he would be, perhaps there will be room in my life for him again someday. But it will be a different relationship, one built on mutual respect, rather than parental obligation. One where boundaries are clear and consequences for violations are enforced. For now, I'm learning to build a life that isn't centered around someone else's needs and dreams. For the first time in 40 years, I'm putting myself first. And you know what? It feels incredible. It feels like freedom. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment what you would do in this situation. The scars my son left on my face have faded, but they taught me an important lesson. Sometimes, the people we love most are capable of hurting us most deeply. And sometimes, the greatest act of love we can perform is to let them go, to allow them to face the consequences of their actions, and to hope that those consequences teach them what our love and sacrifice could not. I signed Thetantar Novamenta Concerp that night, just as I promised. But I signed away his entitlement, not my dignity. I signed away his unearned inheritance, not my son. I signed away the fantasy of who I thought he was, and in doing so, I reclaimed the reality of who I am. Every day, I wake up in my comfortable home, paid for with money I earned through decades of hard work. I drink my coffee and read letters from women whose lives have been transformed by the foundation. I visit the factory and see the faces of workers who know they're valued, respected, and protected. I attend board meetings where decisions are made based on ethics and community impact, not just profit margins. And every day, I'm grateful for those 15 slaps. Not because they didn't hurt, because they absolutely destroyed something inside me, but because they shattered the illusion that was keeping me trapped in a toxic situation. They forced me to see clearly, to act decisively, to choose myself over the fantasy of family harmony. My son took away my illusions that night. In return, I took away his meal ticket. It was a fair exchange, though I doubt he sees it that way yet. Maybe he never will. But that's no longer my problem to solve or my burden to carry. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? I've been asked many times if I regret not giving him a second chance before taking such drastic action. The answer is complicated. I gave him hundreds of chances over the months leading up to that night. Every disrespectful comment, every dismissive gesture, every time he chose Miranda and her family over me, I gave him a chance to course correct. I voiced my concerns, set boundaries, expressed my hurt. He ignored all of it. That night wasn't the first chance, or even the 10th chance. It was the final straw in a long series of betrayals. And when someone shows you through violence that they see you as an obstacle rather than a person, rather than their mother, you have to believe them. You have to protect yourself, because they've made it abundantly clear they won't. The foundation recently held its first annual gala, a fundraising event to expand our programs. Carmen organized everything, and it was beautiful. Women we had helped came to share their stories. Donors pledged generous amounts. Community leaders praised our work. I stood on that stage and felt a sense of pride and purpose that I never experienced even in my most successful business years. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't about building wealth or leaving an inheritance. This was about creating lasting change, about breaking cycles of abuse and poverty, about giving other women the opportunities and support I had to fight for alone. One woman approached me after the event, tears streaming down her face. She was in her 30s, with 2 small children clinging to her legs. "Your foundation gave me the loan to start my catering business," she said. "I left my abusive husband 2 years ago with nothing. Now I'm supporting my kids. I have my own apartment, and I'm building something that's mine. You saved my life." I hugged her tightly, careful not to disturb the children. "You saved your own life," I told her. "You had the courage to leave, to start over, to keep fighting. I just provided some resources. The strength was always yours." Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. But as I watched her walk away, her children now laughing and playing, I couldn't help but think about the grandchild that never existed. The pregnancy Miranda had faked was just another manipulation, but I had allowed myself to dream about being a grandmother. I had imagined teaching a little one to sew, sharing stories about their grandfather, passing down family recipes and traditions. That dream died along with so many others that night. But in its place, I've become a kind of grandmother to dozens of children whose mothers we've helped. I attend their school plays and birthday parties. I slip them treats and listen to their excited stories. I may not have biological grandchildren, but my family has expanded in ways I never anticipated. My son doesn't know about any of this. He doesn't know that the money he thought he was entitled to is funding birthday presents for children whose mothers escaped violence. He doesn't know that his inheritance is paying for therapy sessions, business equipment, and emergency housing. He doesn't know that every single day, his forfeited legacy is making the world a little bit better, a little bit safer for women who need help. Would I tell him if he asked? I honestly don't know. Part of me thinks he should know that his actions inadvertently created something beautiful, but another part of me thinks he doesn't deserve that knowledge, that comfort. He made his choices. he lives with the consequences. What happens with the foundation is no longer any of his business. The investigation into Miranda's family revealed even more disturbing information than I initially knew. They had been targeting wealthy older women and single mothers with successful businesses for years, using Miranda and her brother as bait. They would identify vulnerable targets, initiate romantic relationships, then systematically work to gain control of assets and businesses. We were far from their first victims, just the first ones who fought back effectively. Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing. Several other families came forward after Miranda's arrest, sharing similar stories of manipulation and financial exploitation. A class action lawsuit is pending. It's likely that Miranda and her parents will never fully recover financially or socially from the scandal. Their names are now synonymous with fraud and manipulation in business circles. I feel a strange detachment when I think about them now. They tried to destroy me, and they almost succeeded. But in the end, they destroyed themselves. I didn't have to do much beyond telling the truth and letting justice run its course. Their own actions, their own greed and cruelty, brought about their downfall. My son was a victim of their manipulation too, in a way. But he was also a willing participant. He chose to believe Miranda's lies because they flattered his ego and fed his ambitions. He chose to disrespect and ultimately assault me because I stood in the way of what he wanted. Yes, he was influenced, but he still made choices. And choices have consequences. I've started writing a book about my experience, not for publication necessarily, but for processing. My therapist suggested it as a way to work through the complex emotions that still surface unexpectedly. Some days I'm fine, strong, confident in my decisions. Other days I'm overwhelmed with grief for the relationship I lost, the son I thought I had. The writing has been cathartic. Seeing the entire story laid out chronologically helps me understand how we got from that loving mother-son relationship to violence in a dining room. It wasn't one moment or one decision. It was a gradual erosion of respect, boundaries, and values. It was a series of small betrayals that built into something catastrophic. Comment below what you would have done differently. If I could give advice to my younger self, to the woman who stood in that dining room trying to decide whether to fight or surrender, I would say, trust your instincts. You know something is wrong. You know this isn't normal or acceptable. Don't let anyone convince you that you're overreacting or being too sensitive. Your feelings are valid, your boundaries are important, and you deserve respect regardless of how much you've sacrificed for someone. I would also tell her that it's okay to choose yourself, even when it feels selfish, especially when it feels selfish, because sometimes what feels selfish is actually self-preservation, and you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't help anyone if you're broken and beaten down. The factory recently won an award for ethical business practices and community engagement. Carmen accepted the award, but she insisted I join her on stage. None of this would exist without you, she said during her speech. You built this company with nothing but determination and skill. And when you could have let bitterness destroy it, you chose to transform it into something that helps others. That's true leadership. Standing there, listening to her words, I felt vindicated. All those years of sacrifice, all that pain and betrayal, it had led somewhere meaningful. My life's work wasn't wasted or stolen. It was redirected towards something even more important than profit or family legacy. After the ceremony, several young women approached me wanting advice on starting their own businesses. I spent hours talking with them, sharing what I'd learned, encouraging their dreams. One of them reminded me so much of my younger self, uncertain but determined, scared but brave. What's the most important thing you've learned? She asked me. I thought about it for a moment. That your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, I said finally. You can do everything right, sacrifice everything, love unconditionally, and still be betrayed. But that betrayal says nothing about your value. It only reveals the character of the person who betrayed you. Do you think I overreacted? She nodded thoughtfully, then asked another question. Do you regret anything? I regret not seeing the warning signs sooner, I admitted. I regret making excuses for behavior that should have alarmed me. I regret prioritizing keeping peace over maintaining boundaries. But I don't regret the final decision I made. That was necessary. Painful, but absolutely necessary. These conversations with young women starting their journeys remind me why the foundation matters so much. If I can help even one woman avoid the mistakes I made, if I can give even one woman the resources to escape a bad situation before it becomes violent, then everything I went through has purpose. My son sent another letter last month. He's apparently working 2 jobs now, has moved to a slightly better apartment, and is attending therapy regularly. He wrote about the things he's learning in counseling, about recognizing manipulation patterns and understanding how he allowed Miranda to poison his thinking. He wrote about the shame he feels when he remembers that night, when he remembers raising his hand to me. I don't expect forgiveness, he wrote. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it. But I want you to know that I'm trying to become someone better. Someone who would never, could never, do what I did. I'm trying to become the man Dad would have wanted me to be. The man you raised me to be before I lost my way. I cried when I read that letter. Not tears of forgiveness necessarily, but tears of hope. Hope that maybe, someday, something good could come from all this pain. Hope that my son might actually learn from his catastrophic mistakes. Hope that the little boy I loved so much isn't completely gone, just buried under years of poor choices and toxic influences. Was I wrong to feel this way? But hope isn't the same as reconciliation. I wrote back acknowledging his progress, but maintaining my boundaries. I'm glad you're working on yourself, I said. That's important, necessary work. But healing takes time. Trust, once shattered so completely, takes even longer to rebuild if it can be rebuilt at all. Keep doing the work for yourself, not for me or for the hope of regaining what you lost. Do it because it's the right thing to do. His response was simple. I understand. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that I can change. I haven't given up on that possibility. But I've also accepted that even if he changes completely, becomes a genuinely good person who deeply regrets his actions, our relationship may never recover. Some wounds are too deep. Some betrayals are too profound. And that's okay. Both things can be true simultaneously. He can become better, and I can still choose to keep my distance. The foundation is exploring ways to expand our services beyond just financial support. We're looking into funding educational programs about family violence, particularly the under-discussed issue of adult children abusing elderly parents. It's a growing problem as the population ages and financial stresses increase. But it's rarely talked about because of shame and societal expectations about family loyalty. I've been asked to speak at several conferences about elder abuse and financial exploitation within families. It's terrifying, making my private pain public. But if my story can help change policies, increase awareness, or encourage even one person to seek help, then the terror is worth it. At my first speaking engagement, I stood in front of 300 people and told them about the 15 slaps. I showed them photographs of my bruised face taken that night,